In the winter of 1839, a man signed a receipt for a child he already knew. The ink dried, the candle flickered, and somewhere in rural Virginia, a truth was buried alive. They found the document folded inside a church ledger more than a century later. Yellowed paper, iron gall ink, one clean line written in an elegant hand. One female child, approximately 7 years of age. Sound, for household use. The purchaser was Baron Thomas Albright, landowner, benefactor, and patron of 3 churches. His name still adorns stained glass windows. His portrait still hangs in county offices. To the town, he was generosity itself. The seller was an estate executor from 2 counties away. The child had no listed name, only a price. What makes this receipt unbearable is not the transaction, but the timing. The date aligns precisely with the Baron's daughter Eleanor's 12th birthday. A gift. In letters preserved by the Albright family, Eleanor described her birthday with childlike joy. She wrote of cake, music, and a small quiet girl with dark eyes, who stood beside her chair and never spoke unless spoken to. Eleanor named her Mercy, but Mercy already had a name once, and the Baron knew it. Church records, sealed until 1974, show a private baptism conducted 7 years earlier. The infant's mother was listed as unmarried. The father was unnamed, but the officiant wrote something unusual in the margin, as if his pen had hesitated. Child bears family resemblance. This matter is not to be discussed. From the very beginning, silence was not accidental. It was engineered. This is not a story about cruelty alone. It is about ownership masquerading as order, faith used as architecture, and a family that learned how to turn blood into property. Before Mercy became a gift, before she became a secret, she was proof, and proof is dangerous. The Albright estate did not feel like a plantation. Visitors often remarked on how quiet it was. No shouting, no overseer's whistle, no visible punishment. Instead, the house breathed with rules. Morning prayers at dawn, meals eaten in silence. Sunday sermons conducted in the parlor for both family and servants alike. The Baron believed noise invited sin. Disorder invited questions. Mercy was brought into this environment like a piece of furniture, placed carefully, deliberately, and never acknowledged as new. From the first day, she was instructed where to stand, when to bow her head, and how to fold her hands during prayer. She was not beaten. She was corrected. Correction, in the Albright home, meant repetition. If Mercy forgot a prayer, she recited it again, alone, until nightfall. If she asked a question, she was reminded that children were safest when they listened, especially children without parents. Eleanor adored Mercy, at least at first. She brushed her hair, dressed her in cast-off dresses, called her my shadow. But shadows noticed things. Mercy noticed the way the Baron never looked directly at her, how his jaw tightened when she laughed, how servants crossed themselves quietly when she passed. Most of all, she noticed the portrait in the West Hall. It depicted a younger Baron, perhaps 20 years earlier, standing beside a woman whose face had been carefully scratched out. The damage was old, intentional, violent, but the child in the woman's arms remained untouched. A baby with Mercy's eyes. One evening, Mercy asked a servant who the woman had been. The servant went pale and whispered only this: "Some doors don't open. They bleed." That night, Mercy dreamed of hands pressing her shoulders down while a voice recited scripture. She woke knowing something had been done for her, without her, and that the house itself was complicit. The Albright estate did not punish with whips. It punished with belonging. Every Sunday, the Baron read aloud from the Book of Psalms. His voice was steady, commanding, reverent. He believed scripture was strongest when spoken by men who never doubted themselves. Mercy sat on the floor with the other servants, her knees tucked beneath her, her gaze fixed on the rug. But she listened. Children who listen survive longer. One psalm was repeated more than others. Psalm 127. Children are a heritage of the Lord. Each time the verse was spoken, the Baron's voice slowed, as if savoring it. Heritage, ownership, lineage. After services, Mercy was sometimes summoned to the study, not alone, but never with Eleanor. The Baron would ask her to read aloud. He claimed it was kindness, education, improvement, but his questions were never about words. He asked where she felt pain when she remembered her mother, whether she dreamed of fire or water, if she felt older than her years. Once, he asked if she knew what inheritance meant. Mercy said no. The Baron smiled, a tight, joyless expression, and said, "It means you belong to something older than you." That night, Mercy overheard an argument behind locked doors. A woman's voice, older, shaking, said the child should be sent away, that the resemblance was becoming impossible to deny, that Eleanor was noticing. The Baron responded calmly, "She is already where she belongs." Soon after, the church altered its records. A page was removed, a name erased, and Mercy was moved from the servant quarters to a small room adjacent to Eleanor's. Closer, contained, the Psalms continued, and each week, Mercy understood more clearly that God, in this house, spoke with the Baron's voice. On Eleanor's 13th birthday, the Baron made a promise. He announced it after dinner, standing beneath the chandelier, his hands folded as if in prayer. He said the family was blessed, that sacrifices had been made to preserve their name, that God rewarded obedience. Then he turned to Mercy. "You are part of this family," he said carefully, "whether you understand it or not." Eleanor clapped, delighted. She hugged Mercy and whispered that they would always be together. Mercy felt cold. That night, Eleanor asked the question Mercy had been afraid of for months. "Why do you look like my father when he was young?" Mercy had no answer, but the house did. Within weeks, Eleanor was sent away to a finishing school run by the church. Mercy was told it was temporary, necessary, for her own good. The Baron signed another document shortly after. This one was not a receipt. It was a guardianship declaration, and in the margin, written in the same careful hand as the baptism years before, was a sentence never meant to be read aloud. Truth, when acknowledged, becomes disorder. By the time Eleanor returned, she would be changed. By the time Mercy understood what she was, it would be too late to leave. Because the most terrifying thing the Baron ever purchased was not a child. It was silence. The carriage that took Eleanor away bore the seal of St. Brigid's Female Seminary. It was described publicly as a place of refinement, discipline, godliness. Privately, it was known as a place where girls learned how not to remember. St. Brigid stood on former burial land. The original markers had been removed decades earlier, but locals said the ground never fully settled. Cracks formed in walls no matter how often they were repaired. Doors warped. Bells rang unevenly. Eleanor arrived bright-eyed and curious. Within weeks, her letters changed. The handwriting tightened. The sentences shortened. Questions vanished. The seminary specialized in correction of temperament. Girls who spoke too freely were assigned extended prayer. Girls who questioned authority were isolated, not punished, simply removed from the social body until their silence became natural. One instructor, Sister Agnes Rowe, kept meticulous journals. In them, she described Eleanor as intelligent, emotionally intense, and dangerously observant. She also noted something troubling. Subject exhibits fixation on family resemblance. Speaks of a girl at home. Asks inappropriate genealogical questions. The remedy was scripture memorization and confession. Confession at St. Brigid's did not absolve sins. It replaced them. Girls were taught that memory itself could be sinful, that dwelling on the past invited corruption. By the end of Eleanor's first year, she no longer asked about Mercy in her letters. She asked only when she would be useful again. Back at the estate, Mercy was told Eleanor was thriving. But Mercy began having dreams of bells ringing underground. With Eleanor gone, Mercy's status changed. She was no longer a companion. She was no longer visible. The Baron ordered her moved into a room at the center of the house, an old storage space converted hastily. It had no windows, only a vent near the ceiling that carried prayers from the parlor below. Mercy was given tasks meant to keep her occupied and exhausted. Polishing silver that was never used, copying scripture passages she was forbidden to discuss, sorting family papers she was not allowed to read. But she read them anyway. That was how she learned the truth. A ledger from years earlier listed a domestic arrangement between the Baron and a young, enslaved woman named Ruth. The dates aligned. The margins contained corrections, as if someone had tried to make time itself less obvious. The child born to Ruth was recorded as deceased. Mercy's hands shook as she turned the page. Her name, her original name, appeared once, then never again. That night, the Baron entered her room without warning. He did not strike her. He told her she was fortunate, that many children never learned where they came from. That knowledge could destroy a soul not strong enough to carry it. "You are protected," he said. By my silence. Mercy realized then that protection and erasure were the same thing in this house, and that she was not hidden because she was shameful. She was hidden because she was undeniable. Eleanor returned 3 years later. She was taller, straighter, quieter. Her laughter sounded rehearsed. She embraced her father dutifully and curtsied to the Baron with the precision of someone who had practiced obedience until it felt like virtue. When she saw Mercy, she hesitated. For just a moment, something flickered: recognition, confusion, grief. Then it was gone. Eleanor addressed her as one might address a servant one does not remember hiring. "What is your name?" she asked politely. Mercy answered. Eleanor nodded, satisfied. Later that night, Mercy heard Eleanor crying through the walls. Not sobbing, holding it in. The kind of crying that asks permission before escaping. The next morning, Eleanor asked the Baron if Mercy might remain close. "She makes me feel settled," she said. The Baron agreed. He had planned for this. Trauma, when guided correctly, creates dependency. On the Sunday following Eleanor's return, the Baron delivered a special sermon. The servants were instructed to attend. The theme was lineage. He spoke of bloodlines as sacred vessels, of how families fell not from sin, but from revelation. He warned that truth, when shared without authority, corrupted generations. As he spoke, Mercy felt the weight of every eye in the room avoid her. Eleanor listened intently, her hands folded so tightly her knuckles whitened. When the sermon ended, the Baron placed a hand on Eleanor's shoulder. "You are the future," he said. Then, almost imperceptibly, his gaze shifted to Mercy. "And you are the reminder." That night, Eleanor stood outside Mercy's door. She did not enter. She whispered only one sentence through the wood. "I think they taught me how to forget you." Mercy pressed her hand to the door. On the other side, Eleanor walked away, and the house exhaled. St. Mark's Church did not smell like incense. It smelled like old paper and sealed rooms. The confessionals were carved from black oak, thick enough that voices never traveled far. The Baron preferred it that way. He had donated the wood himself. When Mercy was summoned there, she was told it was for her soul. Confession was not optional. The priest assigned to her, Father Caldwell, did not ask about sins. He asked about dreams, about thoughts that arrived uninvited, about whether Mercy ever imagined herself as something other than what she was. She learned quickly what answers were acceptable, but one evening, exhausted and unguarded, she said the wrong thing. She said she dreamed of a woman whose face she could not see, holding her and calling her by a name that was not Mercy. The confessional went silent. Father Caldwell told her to pray. He also wrote a letter. That letter would never be sent, but its contents would decide Mercy's fate. By the time Mercy realized something was wrong, it was already undeniable. Her body had begun to change. There was no celebration, no acknowledgement, no guidance, only a sudden tightening of rules. She was no longer permitted to leave the house alone. Her work shifted to tasks that kept her near older women, midwives, cooks, matrons, who spoke in glances and half-finished sentences. One of them finally whispered the truth. "The blood remembers," she said, "even when men try to bury it." The Baron did not confront Mercy. He consulted the church. In private meetings, held behind locked doors, decisions were made that did not include her voice. Records from those meetings would later be described as lost, though the indentations remain visible in the paper. Eleanor noticed the changes too. She watched Mercy with an expression that hovered between horror and recognition. One evening, Eleanor asked a question she had been trained never to ask. "Who was your mother?" Mercy answered. Eleanor's face drained of color. She left the room without another word. The next day, Eleanor fainted during prayer. Mercy was taken to a place that did not appear on any map. Officially, it was a charitable annex operated by the church, a refuge for troubled women. In reality, it functioned as a containment space for problems that could not be solved publicly. The women there did not scream. They whispered. Some had been sent for defiance, others for inconvenient truths. All were instructed to forget parts of themselves in exchange for food and safety. Mercy was placed in a shared room with a woman who never spoke. But the woman wrote. At night, by candlelight, she carved words into the wood of her bed frame. They called it Mercy too. They said it was God's will. They said silence was salvation. Mercy traced the carvings until her fingers bled. She realized then that she was not alone in her erasure. She was part of a system. Eleanor wrote a letter from home. It was brief, careful, written in the tone of someone who had learned that language could be dangerous. "I hope you are well," it began. Then, one line stood out, pressed so hard the paper nearly tore. "I remember more than they think." The letter never reached Mercy. It was intercepted by the Baron. In response, he made his final move. He arranged a marriage for Eleanor. He funded a new wing of St. Bridget's. And he authorized a procedure at the Women's Annex, one that would be recorded as necessary. Mercy was told it was for her protection. The church called it correction. History would call it disappearance. Mercy did not vanish in the night. She vanished on paper. The church's registry recorded her departure in a single sentence. Transferred for continued care. No further action required. There was no date, no destination, no signature. At the Women's Annex, her bedframe carvings were sanded down. Her belongings were redistributed. Her name was removed from meal tallies and prayer lists. The women noticed, but they said nothing. Silence was the cost of survival. Weeks later, a small crate arrived at the Albright estate. It contained folded clothing, a pair of worn shoes, and a Bible with the name Mercy carefully scratched out. The Baron burned the crate himself, not because he feared discovery, but because ritual mattered. Erasure, to him, was a form of order. Eleanor's wedding was held in St. Mark's Church. The mirrors in the bride's chamber were covered with linen, as was customary, but no one uncovered them afterward. Eleanor did not ask why. Those present remarked on her composure, her stillness, her obedience. She repeated her vows clearly. But when the priest asked if there were any objections, Eleanor's gaze drifted, not to the congregation, but to the empty aisle where servants once stood. For a moment, it seemed she might speak. Then the organ surged, and the moment passed. After the ceremony, Eleanor asked her father one final question. "Is she gone?" The Baron answered truthfully, "Yes." Eleanor nodded. That night, she dreamed of a door with no handle. Decades later, when the Albright estate was sold and converted into a historical site, workers found a sealed room behind the study. Inside were boxes of church correspondence, birth records, and ledgers marked private. Most had been deliberately misfiled. Some had been altered, but not all damage is thorough. A graduate student cataloging the materials noticed repeating inconsistencies, dates that aligned too closely, names that vanished and reappeared under different handwriting. And one receipt, a purchase record for a child, cross-referenced with a baptism, cross-referenced with a guardianship declaration. The pattern was unmistakable. The student brought the findings to the local historical society. They declined to publish. The church requested the materials. The documents were sealed again, this time under preservation law. Protection, they called it. The town still celebrates Founders' Day. Children recite the Baron's name. Flowers are laid beneath his statue. The churches still ring their bells on schedule. But some elders refuse to enter St. Mark's. They say the building hums when it's empty. They say prayers echo twice. And sometimes, during restoration work, workers find words carved into wood where no records say would ever existed. They never photograph it. They sand it down. Because everyone knows what happens to people who insist on remembering. The Baron died peacefully. Eleanor lived a long, quiet life. And mercy exists only in the spaces where records fail. Stories like this do not disappear because they are untrue. They disappear because they implicate too many people. The Baron did not act alone. The church did not object. The town benefited from silence. What survived was not justice, but documentation. Fragments, indentations, absences that lined up too perfectly to be coincidence. This is why forgotten histories feel unsettling. They are not gone. They are waiting. There is no record of Mercy's death. No grave. No prayer. Only a receipt. That is the horror. Not the act, but the system that made it ordinary. If you stand in St. Mark's today and listen closely, you might hear nothing at all. And that is exactly how it was designed. Because some families learned that the most effective way to destroy truth was not violence. It was reverence.